So I wanted to talk about the film Anora that was directed and written by Sean Baker. I really, really loved the film, and I was really happy to see it win a bunch of Oscars. I'm gonna be talking about mainly the sex work aspect within the film and that topic through the lens of the film. So if you haven't seen the film, I super, super highly recommend you watch it. It's absolutely fantastic, and Mikey Madison did an amazing job in the lead as well. Um, but if you haven't, you could still probably follow along because I'm going to be talking generally about the aspect of sex work. And sorry that I'm not looking directly at the camera oftentimes. I'm still a little awkward about filming myself talking about stuff, so bear with me. Okay, so when it comes to this film, I think first of all it's really important to highlight that this is not the first time Sean Baker has delved into the topic of sex work. Most notably, I believe it was his directorial debut, Tangerine, which was in 2015, I believe, is a film that he filmed that interestingly was also filmed entirely on an iPhone, and it follows a bunch of black sex workers who are also trans and their lives. So also, for anyone who says that Anora is about white privilege, there's obviously aspects of that, as is with any story about white people in society typically. Um, but he definitely does not just talk about that aspect of sex work when it comes to like conventionally attractive young white women. Um, and again, also the cis aspect of this. Um, so this is a topic that I've seen him delve into a lot of times, and I think something really interesting, or not interesting, but really kind of admirable in his work is that oftentimes, whether he discusses sex work or even if anyone has seen the Florida Project, and that as well, he delves into the lives of characters that are very much so considered on the outskirts of society, people that would typically be looked down upon, and he manages to make you empathize with them while not doing it by creating just like a kind of Oscar bait sob story. He gives them actual depth and something that's like humanizes them beyond the way where, like, I really don't know how better to describe it than the fact that it's not like a Oscar baity sob story. He actually gives these people depth and doesn't just make you look at them and say, oh, these poor people, I feel so bad for them. He actually creates realistic people that you can like aspects of and identify aspects within these people that are on the outskirts of society that will very realistically resemble people in your own life or people you've interacted with or seen that are not in those situations. Um, and a lot of the mannerisms, a lot of the script writing in Anora, for example, I think really does that well. A lot of the kind of comedy that Anora has with her friend is a really good example of that. She very much so has a personality outside of just this story, and she has a sense of humor where even if you don't personally appreciate it, which I do, but even if someone watching it doesn't appreciate it, she feels like a very real person who can have fun, who can do things, and is not just like a sad character or anything like that. And I think this aspect is a huge reason I really appreciate Nora as a movie, is because of the fact that this film manages to, I don't want to say not glorify sex work, because I think that sex work is a morally neutral thing. There's nothing immoral about working in sex work so long as you're, informing, as long as there's informed consent and everyone's like, consenting adults, I could not care less. Um, I'm a very progressive person who believes that sex work should be legalized, both to protect people consuming it and to protect, more than anything, the people that work in it, because even if you're someone who thinks, a lot of times this ends up being poor women or women of color or trans women, for example, which is true, that those communities are more vulnerable to go into this field. I think that those are more so symptoms of other aspects of society where these groups are marginalized, don't have as much access to wealth, and that's just a way that they take. But a really important thing to me, and a reason that I really appreciated the film, is that it doesn't really, it doesn't paint it as though that's the only reason someone would work in sex work. I think the beautiful thing about this film is that it manages to kind of show you, kind of through Anora's eyes, that she genuinely seems to enjoy it. She seems to have fun. She doesn't seem like she's going into it and, you know, you see her at the club and she's like depressed or something and she's like, ugh, I can't believe I can do that. You can see her joking along with a friend or something as she's giving a lap dance to someone and stuff like that. And you can see that it seems like work, like for anyone else. You know, anyone else goes to work, maybe you're not the happiest about it, you're like, didn't feel like showing up today. And it manages to show it as what it is, which is work. And there's people that enjoy doing it. And the thing that I really appreciate is that the film of Anora manages to touch on the really mindfucky aspect for women in this field of there is this kind of maybe fantasy, be it because of media perception, be it because genuinely people just want a better life for themselves, or anything of the sort. There's this kind of idea of maybe someone will rescue you out of the situation, which outside of just being kind of a typically kind of sexist notion, because we're typically talking about it in a heteronormative society, so it's typically a woman being rescued by a man. Outside of that aspect of it, there's also something that completely kind of robs the autonomy from the women that work in this field to, again, work there because they genuinely enjoy this. And I think that the film manages to capture really beautifully the kind of thing where even alongside the fact that she really actually enjoys this work seemingly and all these things, there can be aspects within her that still long for closeness, right? You can imagine someone who works there, they still want to get married one day maybe, they still want a serious relationship, they still want to feel loved and cared for, right? Like every human being wants to feel cared for. Even aromantic people, they might not long for romantic love from people, but they long for some kind of closeness and security from people in their life, like friends, for example, or family. So I think the film kind of shows really well how that longing does exist within her, and how, while she does enjoy what she does, there is a kind of mindfucky thing where she can be in a situation where she cannot know whether someone is treating her as someone that they're getting attached to or someone that they're getting a utility out of. Is she just a sex worker to them, or is she their girlfriend? Which is basically what we see her have with Venya. And I think that, funnily enough, with the whole discussion of kind of white privilege, I think that Venya demonstrates that way more than Anora, possibly, because I guess it'd be like white privilege mixed in with the fact of coming from a wealthy background, mostly that, but the whole factor where Venya gets to basically, she's like his weekend girlfriend, you know? He gets to go enjoy doing stuff with her, spend a lot of money, fuck around, all these things, and then he goes back to his normal life and nothing is that different. He can get married to her and then go back to a normal life where she's completely fucked by it, right? I think that an aspect that people don't appreciate is that this film, just as much as it is about sex work, it's also about kind of the differences between economic classes, right? Anora seemingly is like on a lower end of that, Venya is very clearly on the higher end of that, and how appealing that would be to a person and how fucky that power differential is, where he gets to basically, in a sense, use her. But I appreciate that the film, while showing that he does this thing, doesn't go fully in the direction of just Venya is evil. There's a sense where he feels very childish, maybe he's a little immature, and a part of that is this as well, where he doesn't understand what his actions are. And just like you'd see teenagers, for example, when you were in high school or something, you might have had a partner, right? Whether you're dating men or women or non-binary group or whatever, you might have had a partner and you felt intensely in love with them, and it can be over within a month because you're just immature. Your feelings are immature, they fluctuate way more, and I think that he's a character who's very immature, and on top of that, a really interesting aspect that I really liked is also the factor of he comes from a Russian family, and as someone who doesn't come from a Russian family, but my family is of Soviet background, well, rather come from countries that were former part of the Soviet Union, I very much so can see that aspect of not discussing certain things. Everything needs to look clean, and like you must have like an exterior that's very clean and very neat and by the book kind of thing. And you have that on the plane with him talking to his parents, for example, where you can see the whole aspect where he talks about what if I was gay or something like that, or bi, and I brought home a guy, like who cares, kind of thing. And he's very immature in the way he discusses these things, but it's not like he went in trying to just mess with Anora. A part of him possibly genuinely liked her, and he just bucked to it once he realized the thing that he already probably should have known going into it, that his family won't approve of it. But he's still kind of a child who's beholden to his parents, but he is in a sense rebelling, not just by going along with Anora, or not going along, but going with Anora and being with her, but also in the fact of kind of trying to live his own life, trying to not be beholden to them. And there's an interesting aspect there where he's not painted as a very black and white character. While he was extremely hurtful and extremely irresponsible towards her, you see a sense within him that's also fighting against his parents and the culture he came from, that tries to dictate to him what to do. And I've remembered for a long time and haven't gotten to the main topic that I really wanted to talk about, which is the aspect of essentially the overlapping of sex work in a sexist society. Or rather, how is sexism within society, patriarchy, all these things, how do they affect someone who works in sex work? And I think that there's something in Anora's character that captures that really beautifully, because there's essentially, within feminist circles, there's a whole rift around sex work negative, I guess, like anti-sex work feminists and pro-sex work feminists. And a lot of the arguments coming from the negative, or against sex work in feminist circles, is around the fact of essentially this continues the objectification of women. The fact that you can pay for them, basically their bodies are mere uses to you, they're just meat, all these things, messaging that we already see a lot in media and is already constantly reinforced in our patriarchal society. But alongside that, I think that there's a very strong argument from the pro-sex work aspect of feminism, which is about, isn't the whole idea of feminism granting women autonomy, letting them do what they want? And another aspect is that a lot of people that are against sex work are doing that from a perspective of the only reason a woman would ever want to do that for a job would be because she needs the money, she's desperate for it, all these things. And it's completely invalidating. I guess I haven't heard this argument. I'm imagining, like, as someone who's pro-sex work, this would be my argument as someone who's very pro that and generally very sex positive, insofar as well as it intersects with feminism. I think that there's an aspect there where essentially, besides just the autonomy argument, the argument against women working in sex work is that a lot of people have this basic assumption that women just don't really want sex. That's a thing for guys, right? Like, oh, maybe she wants sometimes or whatever, but there's this kind of assumption that sex is something that women grant men. It's something that, like, a man needs to work for because a woman doesn't really want to do it. And it reinforces all of these ideas of purity in society and slut-shaming against women, because it's considered, why are you doing that? Something must be completely wrong with you. You're completely off the norm for wanting that. And so, again, going back to the argument, pro-sex work feminist argument would be also the fact that we should be able to understand that, with the understanding that women can want sex just as much as men do. They do on average tend to have a lower sex drive, but that doesn't mean that there are not either people that there are women that are more, that have a higher libido or lower libido, just as the same as there is with men. That from that understanding, we should also understand that when we kind of push against sex work, we are kind of reinforcing this notion that the only reason a woman would ever enter this field is just because she needs money, and we're reinforcing this kind of negativity and purity culture around women and their sexuality. And this is where the last scene of the film, which, if you haven't seen, I already said, but major spoilers, I guess. The last scene where she is sitting with Yuri in the car after everything has happened already, She already got hurt by Venya and all these things. And he's one of the only, like, people that has been kind to her, has not tried to pursue her sexually or romantically or anything of the sort. He was just kind of joking along with her, seemed to show some care, like giving her a scarf when it was cold, things like that, joking along with her. And basically, that scene super beautifully and sadly demonstrated something that, while told through the lens of a sex work, can be true for women, but I think it's probably super accentuated when you're a sex worker, where she found this guy who's nice to her, who's kind to her, and basically she doesn't know what to do with that because she assumes there might be some other motive at work, because she doesn't know what it feels like to just have care shown to you. And this is where I really appreciate what the film is doing, because it's targeting that aspect of how this can be a really difficult experience. Again, generally for women, but even more so for sex workers, because they're way more used to constantly being sought after for their looks, for their sexual potential, for them as sexual partners, where they might start internalizing the idea that that's their value, and anyone trying to seek closeness with them is seeking that. And even though it's somewhat not the scene I just discussed, but another scene that came a little bit before that, it's kind of shown to be kind of a comedic scene. There's a scene earlier where Anora, talking to him, tells him, you know, you definitely would have raped me if the other guy wasn't there, whenever he was trying to restrain her way earlier on in the film. And he's kind of baffled and laughing. He's like, what do you mean? And she's like, no, I know you would have. And again, it's kind of going back to this idea of, it's very difficult for her to perceive the idea that someone would seek something out of her outside of just the sexual aspect. And there's something really sad and touching, but beautiful, and really honestly positive about Yuri's action in the end, when she is sitting in the car with him in the last scene of the film, and she tries to pursue him. She starts kissing him and getting on top of him and all that stuff, and then he kind of goes along with it, but as soon as you can tell, she starts like a little bit like being upset and like kind of slightly like punching him in anger, and all he does is just hold her. And it's beautiful because we're shown a character that can appreciate that aspect of her, right? You can tell that he does like her, he is attracted to her, but he, before anything else, sees her as a human being and understands her weaknesses and where she's vulnerable. And I genuinely get chills talking about that scene because I find it to be so beautiful in the way it demonstrated it. And I think a reason that I've seen, obviously anecdotally, but I've seen a lot of women really, really like his character. And it might seem kind of baffling to someone from the outside because he doesn't say that much, he doesn't have much, and I agree, you shouldn't be attracted to someone just because they're good to you. But I think that's something that a lot of women were really drawn. Women are, honestly, I can imagine a lot of people that are attracted to men and date men can identify with this. That there's an aspect there where there's a lack of male characters, or men characters, sorry, in media that will show this sense of, before anything else, they can put your needs a little bit, or not even your needs, but they care about your vulnerability. Whenever you're doing something, even if he's enjoying the fact that he's going to have sex with her, before anything else, she's a human being still. Her value as a sexual partner does not come first. And whenever she starts lashing out a bit, instead of just being like, hey, what the fuck, like, what are you doing, and just being upset because of his own want in that moment, he can understand that something is hurt within her. And obviously it's understandable because she just also got, I wouldn't even say dumped by Venya. Venya completely put her down and told her basically, you're just a hooker and that's all you ever were. He can understand that aspect of the fact that she's hurt, and that what she really needs is just closeness and attachment and security, and to feel worthy, to feel like anyone can value her for anything else. And again, to go back to my overall point about the film, I think it's really beautiful that this film manages to, with a lot of different scenes, kind of not even contrasting. A lot of scenes seems to kind of exhibit both these aspects, where like Anora clearly does enjoy sexual aspects. We see her even when she is with Venya. She doesn't seem like she's just performatively like sleeping with him or performing to him sexually or anything like that just because of the money aspect. It seems like she genuinely likes it. You have like a part where I believe they're already married and they're sitting around and she wants to sleep with him, and you can tell she just has a high sex drive, but that doesn't negate the fact that she has a need for attachment. And I think that even outside of the fact of it being really unique and noteworthy and admirable as a film for, again, portraying a sex worker who also has a want to be in that field, it also shows her struggles within that field and the aspects that negatively affect her, but also it's showing just like very high libido woman character, and the fact that like there's struggles within that and how you're perceived in society as well. And again, this struggle of you might genuinely want that, but you often will encounter people like she does in her field of work, for example, right? People that's all they view in you. And there's something very fucky within that to me super overlaps with patriarchy and sexism in society, because men get to be both, right? As much as I have a lot of criticisms for the film of Barbie and I don't like the way this scene was executed, an example that I think a lot of people super resonated with, particularly I've seen that more from women, is the speech from the mom in Barbie where she talks about how you have to be pretty but not too pretty, because then it seems like you're attention seeking. And that whole aspect of needing to be stuck between two things, of here it's these two things are two different wants from Anora, and the fact that she kind of is in a society where she's not allowed to pick both. She can't be both. Most people don't view her as someone who might actually have a high sex drive and enjoy sex, but also has an actual need for attachments and is an actual human being with a personality under that. And and again, a thing that the film super nicely demonstrates by just like her sense of humor with her friend and her personality even when with Venya. You see her again brilliantly portrayed by Mikey Madison, who very much so brings her personhood forth. And we live in a society where typically that's a thing that oftentimes men are more so allowed to do that. Men are never perceived as though if they want sex or they have a high sex drive, that's all that defines them, right? It might be on the very, very extreme edges of society, or the very extreme edges of high sex drive, but typically we just understand that that's a part of, a human need that people have, and that people may vary in the level of sex that they want, but that for most people that's just a common human need. And nobody's viewing men as lesser than or as though that defines them. But for women, it's very difficult to find people that will see you as both, even if it's not just your partner, but society at large. Because again, I think a part of that just intersects with the fact that we don't really, for whatever reason, we as a society have some purity around women, and we have, I can hypothesize why that came about historically, but current day, there's not really a justification for that, besides the fact that it's just a thing that we have been doing in society for a long time. There is this perception that women just don't really want sex, so if you do, that's already a defining feature of you. That's not a part of, like, just you being a human being, like, and whereas for a guy, if you treated it like that, most people would view it as absurd. Like, how is that a defining feature that's no more a defining feature of them than them needing food to survive, or water, or oxygen, right? It's just a human need, a human drive that exists. And Anora really beautifully portrays the fact of her having that, enjoying it, and again, seemingly being in sex work because she genuinely enjoys this. And she's like, yeah, this is a nice way for me to make money. I'd enjoy it more than, like, I don't know, working at like a 7-Eleven or anything of the sort. And I enjoy it more, I get more money here, and that's it. But with that comes the aspect of people do define you by that. And I think my takeaway, more than anything, well, I guess not my takeaway because I already thought this, but I think a really beautiful thing that the film tries to have people take away is the fact of this isn't a defining feature. And the thing that this film does, which I really admired for and genuinely really admirable for the Oscars for recognizing the film because of it, because I don't think this is typically a thing that would win the Oscars because of this story, is the factor where the film manages to basically say she can genuinely want to do this, and we can also recognize that her wanting to do that doesn't mean that there's not problems within that, right? Like, we can recognize that when it comes to something else, like, for example, with alcohol, right? We can recognize there can be really problematic aspects that people can have when engaging with alcohol, even if they're not alcoholics, right? There can be a thing where people will defer to it to kind of like ignore their issues or something like that, which can develop into a sort of alcoholism, and you can have a psychological dependence on something, but nobody's gonna say you don't genuinely just enjoy the thing, right? Nobody's saying you're just turning to it because of that. We can recognize that there's some aspects of it that you genuinely like, or maybe a more apt example would be like, I don't know, like hanging out with friends. People can use that to cover up for things going wrong in their own life and sitting down and introspecting, or something else, like someone going out with friends to a club. They can do it because they genuinely enjoy that, but that could also have like problematic aspects of maybe the environment they're in, maybe the way that they use that to, again, overcompensate for other things that are wrong with them, or just the way that it makes them view the world or the people they interact with, and the way that that affects their view of themselves, which, again, I think is really reflected in Anora. And I think the main takeaway that people should take from this film is basically we should treat women, and particularly sex workers, better in our society. That doesn't need to be a defining feature of it, of you as a person, right? If you feel like that's the main aspect of your personality, that's perfectly fine, that's your decision. But our base assumption should not be that this is a defining feature of someone and that it means that that's all they want and all these things, right? Like, again, this super overlaps with slut shaming in society, where there would be this perception of a woman that slept around is not worthy of dating, right? She's for the streets or whatever. And that whole perception is incredibly dehumanizing because, again, we should just understand it on the most basic level. Most people seek some connection. Most people seek attachment. That's just a basic human need. Like, literally every person needs this. It might be in different forms more so, but everyone seeks attachment. And once we take that aspect away from people and we define them by something that tells us that they don't have a need for attachment, we're not understanding them, we're dehumanizing them. And more than anything, we're preventing them of the opportunity to actually get that need met. And yeah, I think I've rambled enough and I've kind of repeated a lot of things that I think I already said. But yeah, I think it's really beautiful the way that this film captures both, again, sexual drive within women in a sexist society and how that's perceived, and more than anything, the way it's perceived for sex workers. And just one little note at the end, because I mentioned that that I really appreciate that the Oscars recognize that, which, again, even outside the fact that it's an independent film that won, which is incredible, and I knew and was happy to see that Sean Baker did in fact talk about the need for more independent cinema and for people to support it, which I'm wholeheartedly in agreement on. Even outside of that, there's something really nice about a film that I can't think of any other films besides, again, maybe Sean Baker films, and there might be ones that are also not very well known, that don't look at sex work as this sad aspect. If you think of most media that you've ever seen a sex worker portrayed in, it's almost always, if not always, this idea of like she's doing it for money, she's doing it for money, and she'd do anything else if she could, but she just has to do that, or she's doing it and she's waiting for the man to rescue her out of it. Like, I've for a reason avoided I'm blanking on the name, but the Julia Roberts film, because of that aspect where the whole idea there is basically she gets rescued. It's a Cinderella story. And I like that this film kind of takes that aspect, the idea of like you have Vanya's character, but it's showing that, one, that character is like, she's not the only flawed person, right? That rescuer, the savior, the man typically in the story, is not always like this perfect savior who's just going to rescue her out of the situation. He has his own flaws and his own things. But also the fact that some of these women don't need saving. Some of them just need a society that treats them a little better, and then they could be perfectly happy working within that field. And I think that's something we should take away from this film as a society, or at least people that watched it, is that aspect of don't dehumanize someone because of that, and understand, again, just as we understand for men, this is a normal human drive, and we can imagine, just ask yourself, can you imagine a man ever working in sex work, not just for the fact that he needs money, like, obviously, he needs something to survive, but, like, because he genuinely enjoys that, and he's like, that sounds like a really fun route to go down. I really enjoyed this thing, and I get money for it. And if you can imagine that for a man, there's no reason you shouldn't be able to for a woman, even if you do think, which again, on average is true, women have a lower sex drive. We understand that this fluctuates, this is different between person to person. So we should just be accepting of that, and instead of assuming that sex workers are these sad individuals on the outskirts of society, listen to them and understand what their needs are. For women that are in that because of an actual need for money and are being exploited, again, legalizing would be, in my opinion, the best route, because we're protecting those women, because these fields are going to be less exploitative, hopefully, if there's regulations on it. But also a lot of those other things relate to lack of, like, a safety net in society, right? And another route for people that are poor. And so, yeah, just listen to people, and if you've ever listened to there's a lot of interesting panels, especially on Twitch, of sex workers that discuss this type of thing, and there's a lot of things that they can talk about that are really interesting, that regard the idea of they really enjoy doing this, but with that there is this internal struggle of, is that all I'm valued for? Is that my entire worth? Is that all that people see to me? And I think Sean Baker and Mikey Madison together created this character and this story that demonstrates really nicely to someone like me that is interested in these subjects and listening to people from that world, that he in fact is listening to people there. And they've talked about in their acceptance, Mikey Madison specifically talked about thanking the sex workers that she's talked to alongside the making of the film, to kind of get their perspective and add depth to her character, and I think that super shows in the film. And I think that we as a society need to stop viewing it, if I wanted to sum it up, we need to stop viewing it as though the only problem that sex workers have is that they should just not be doing that, full stop, because they're only doing it because they're in a desperate situation. Because when we do that, again, not only are we dehumanizing them, and not only are we adding to sex-negative society, specifically for women's sexuality, we're also ignoring real issues that exist within that system, that we should listen to people within it if our want is to protect people within that field generally. But again, a lot of this conversation typically centers around women. We should actually listen to those people instead of just assume that they're all these sad individuals just need to be saved out of it. So, yeah. Sorry that I rambled and again repeated a lot of different points, but again, if you've watched all of this and you still haven't seen the film, I highly, highly recommend to watch it. And yeah, that's it. Bye.